around the 30 interviews that I did with recently wounded soldiers and their families were actually part of the research for Two Wars of Charlie F. But because the Two Wars of Charlie F was a recovery project as well as a piece of theatre, it was very important for all sorts of reasons that the stories that were represented on stage were those of the soldiers in the cast, on stage, of course, which meant that I was left with a huge amount of material and thoughts that I hadn't been able to use. I suppose I hadn't been able to utilise it as I normally would as a writer, in that, to really sort of delve in and I guess, imaginatively excavate the potential narratives and the various subject matters. So actually, BBC Radio approached me about doing a 5-part drama, and I asked if I could go back to the same territory for that reason. And I also asked if I could do it in verse, and it felt like a very natural move for me. I suppose you could describe the Two Wars of Charlie F as sort of a piece of documentary theatre, I suppose, and I think of Pink Mist as being a work of lyrical documentary as well. But of course I had that complete freedom of the page, and I had the freedom to invent characters. It's still very much based upon those interviews, upon the stories, the experiences that I heard. But also you've got this added sort of tool of poetry, of rhythm and metre, so to sort of excavate the whole thing in a more nuanced way as well. The form of Pink Mist is actually a form that I've been organically working towards without knowing it for a long time. Because if you think about it, I suppose having written fiction and non-fiction, a bit of journalism, some stage work, I felt that all of that has sort of come together in Pink Mist, in that it is dramatic, it's also very strongly narrative, and yet what I think of as my foundation form, poetry, is undoubtedly what underpins it. And I've always felt, there's a reason why war poetry penetrates and sustains and stays with people for so long, and that we've just always known that poetry has the potential to really kind of penetrate in a way that other forms of writing don't. And I believe it's because it's penetrating in so many different ways at once, rhythmically, obviously intellectually, but emotionally, and in terms of imagery as well. So it was odd because, you're right, it did feel very, very natural. I think when you first look at it, a verse drama about young boys who are coming home having been wounded in Afghanistan might not seem immediately obvious. But it did to me, and what's also been very interesting is that it's felt very natural to a lot of young soldiers who have either heard me read it or who have read it themselves as well. When you talk to people who experience conflict, especially young boys, you're really aware of, for them, the world closes down to the people that they're with. And the word love just keeps cropping up again and again, either in terms of people back home or for the people who you're fighting with. And we've all heard it before, but it's important to realise it again, because we don't seem to stop doing this, that wars are very often fought by children and 18, 19-year-olds, and the only thing that is really concerning them out there is this very close, this bond, this sense of comradeship, this love. And it's only afterwards, when they come home, that all of the other terrible consequences of what has either been done to them or their friends, or even more common, what they have done, starts to flood in. So I think it might sound strange, but it's also such a heightened environment that in these interviews I kept hearing moments of surprising beauty. And in terms of language as well. I think every war throws up its own lexicon, and that's why I was so interested by the phrase Pink Mist, and to hear these boys sort of bandy it about. And it sounds, it sounds kind of overly, romantic almost. And then when you learn what it is, it's truly horrific. And so I think it was important, and also just as a writer, if you have unremitting sort of grimness on the page and violence and blood and gore, people are going to turn their head away pretty quickly, and you've got to be, there's an element of manipulation as well, but also sort of, pulling back the curtain and saying, this is the situation in every facet. I think one of the motivations to work both on the Two Wars of Charlie F and on Pink Mist is because modern societies, and I would certainly count Britain among them, have become very skilled at living at a great distance from the conflicts, which are actually their conflicts, whether you agree with the war or not. It is ours. We all have a responsibility for what's happening. And one of the main motivations was just to pull it close. And I suppose, to find various techniques to almost sneak in the back door. I mean, a lot of Charlie F is very funny, and we've got dancing and singing and sort of jazz hands, and it's the same with Pink Mist. There is that poetry and those human stories that not only make it human, but hopefully sort of seduce people for a moment. And then you remind them what those three letters mean. And I think that we do forget, especially now that we have a professional army, largely recruited from the most socially deprived areas of Britain. A lot of people can glide through life without having to touch the subject at all. So I think you're right, yes. It is forgotten, and it's one of the main sources of frustration, especially amongst the families and the women I spoke to, is a sense of it's not understood and it's not known and it's not acknowledged. And yet the war in Afghanistan has now gone on for longer than the First War and the Second War together. There's a ticking psychological time bomb, and one thing I definitely witnessed was how the consequences of PTSD and these incredible environments of violence that these young boys are in, they resonate through families and children and marriages, and if we don't catch it quickly, we're going to be reaping the consequences of that for many years to come. I mean, the Two Wheels of Charlie F was meant to be just two shows at the Theatre Royal Haymarket. It was, first and foremost, a recovery project. They were both sold out, both got standing ovations. That kind of stunned us all, so we took a step back. We took it on a very short tour. It then won the Amnesty International Freedom of Expression Award up in Edinburgh. And you have to remember, this is acted mostly by squaddies, many who were very recently wounded, many who are still living the issues of the play. So I was just in awe, and it was astonishing. And what thrilled me as the writer was that we were getting military audiences and military families who never set foot in a theatre before, but we were also getting Amnesty International, we were also getting anti-war campaigners, and that's what was so important for me, is that, the politics of care does not have to split down left or right, and it's for all of us. So yes, amazingly, it's now going on tour 2 weeks in Canada, and then I think an 18-week tour around Britain. So who'd have thought it? I mean, it's stunning.